It all started with something trivial, like it always does. Jenna and I had been married for 7 years, and over time, our small arguments turned into real fights. That night, it was about her coming home late again. She claimed it was work-related, but lately, her excuses had started feeling too rehearsed, too familiar. We snapped at each other, words sharper than intended. In the heat of the moment, we both stormed off, her to the bedroom and me to the couch. The next morning, there was no apology, no attempt to make things right. Normally, after a blowout like that, we'd send each other a quick text by mid-morning. But not this time. Jenna left for work without so much as a glance in my direction. I wasn't going to be the one to reach out first, either. My pride wouldn't let me. 2 days passed like that. Silent. Awkward. I buried myself in work, avoiding home as much as possible. Every time I saw her, there was a strange tension in the air, something beyond just our fight. She seemed distant, distracted. There was no warmth in her voice, no remorse. If anything, she looked relieved we weren't talking. That should have been my first clue. On the second night of our Cold War, I came home late, hoping to find her asleep so I wouldn't have to face the awkwardness. But when I opened the door, I realized she wasn't there. No car in the driveway, no lights on inside. It was almost midnight. I didn't panic right away. Maybe she was out with friends, blowing off steam. But as the hours ticked by, unease crept in. Where was she? I sent her a text. Are you okay? No response. I called and it went straight to voicemail. When I finally went to bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The next morning, Jenna was back as if nothing had happened. She moved around the house like a ghost, avoiding eye contact, her face unreadable. I wanted to ask her where she'd been, but something in me held back. Maybe I was afraid of the answer. Instead, I stayed quiet, hoping things would eventually go back to normal. They didn't. That evening, while Jenna was in the shower, I noticed her phone lying on the kitchen counter. Normally, I wouldn't think twice about it, but this time, the gnawing suspicion was too much. I picked it up, thumb hovering over the screen. Locked, of course. I knew her passcode. Everyone knew their spouse's phone code, right? The thought nagged at me, pulling me in, but I put the phone down. I wasn't going to snoop yet, but the seed of doubt had already been planted. Something had changed in those 2 days of silence. I just didn't know how deep it ran. The tension in the house continued to grow. Jenna was more distant than ever. We were like strangers passing in the hallway, only exchanging the bare minimum of words. I couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was at play, something beyond just our fight. But every time I tried to bring it up, she would shut down, either by walking away or burying herself in her phone. That damn phone. I started noticing how glued she was to it, how she always kept it face down when we were in the same room. It had become like a barrier between us, something she hid behind. At night, I'd hear her typing away, the faint glow of the screen spilling into the darkness. The more I noticed it, the more it ate at me. One evening, a few days after our initial fight, I finally broke. She was sitting on the couch, staring at her phone like she was waiting for something, her fingers dancing across the screen in rapid movements. Without thinking, I blurted out, "Who are you texting?" Jenna froze, her fingers halting mid-type. She didn't look up at me right away. When she did, there was something in her eyes. Guilt? Annoyance? It was hard to tell. "Just a work thing," she said, brushing me off. Her voice was too casual, too dismissive. She put her phone down, but not before locking it. "Really? You've been on your phone nonstop for days now. It's starting to feel like you're hiding something." She sighed, leaning back into the couch as if she was exhausted by the conversation before it even started. "We haven't been talking, and now you want to act like you care?" Her words hit hard, but I couldn't let it go. "I do care. That's the problem. You're acting different, Jenna, and it's not just because of the fight. You're being paranoid," she snapped. "I'm not hiding anything." But the way she said it didn't sit right with me. There was no reassurance in her voice, no attempt to put my mind at ease. She got up and left the room before I could say anything else. Later that night, while Jenna was asleep, the nagging suspicion returned. This time it was too strong to ignore. I knew her phone was in the kitchen, charging. I couldn't stop thinking about it, and after a long internal battle I decided to give in. I tiptoed out of bed and went straight to it. Her phone sat there, innocently enough, but it felt like a loaded weapon. I knew her passcode, of course I did. My fingers trembled as I typed it in. The screen unlocked and I was in. At first, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. The usual messages from friends and work colleagues. But then, I opened her messaging app. A thread with a name I didn't recognize stood out. Kyle. The conversation was pinned at the top like it was important. I hesitated for a second before opening it. What I found made my stomach drop. The messages weren't just casual chats or work-related discussions. They were flirty, intimate. The kind of messages you wouldn't send to just anyone. They went back weeks, maybe even months. There were photos too, nothing explicit, but enough to tell me this wasn't just some innocent friendship. I felt like the floor had been pulled out from under me. My hands clenched the phone so tightly I thought I might break it. My mind raced, trying to piece together the timeline. Could this have been happening during our fight? Was she with him when she disappeared that night? My heart pounded in my chest as I scrolled further, searching for any indication of when this had started. One message, in particular, sent a chill down my spine. It was dated 2 nights ago, during our silent treatment. Last night was amazing. Can't wait to see you again. That was all I needed to see. I stood there, gripping the phone, my pulse racing. I didn't know what to do. Should I confront her? Should I let it slide until I had more proof? Or was this all the proof I needed? I couldn't stay in that moment for long. I put the phone back exactly where I found it and returned to bed, my mind in overdrive. Lying next to Jenna, I could feel the distance between us like a chasm. She was right there, but suddenly, it felt like she was a million miles away. I didn't sleep that night. My mind kept replaying everything I'd seen, everything I'd missed. The warning signs, the shifts in her behavior. How could I have been so blind? And most importantly, what was I going to do now? The next morning, Jenna left early for work, as if nothing had changed. She kissed me on the cheek, a hollow, routine gesture. I forced a smile, but my mind was elsewhere. I couldn't stop thinking about the messages. Kyle was now more than just a name in her phone. He was the embodiment of every doubt, every suspicion that had gnawed at me for days. Once she was gone, I knew I had to get to the bottom of this. The messages were damning, but they were vague. Just enough to fuel suspicion, but not enough to confront her outright. I needed more proof. Something concrete. Something that couldn't be dismissed as paranoia. I decided to take a personal day from work. No way I could focus on anything else while this was hanging over me. I spent the morning in our home office, scrolling through her social media, looking for any clues. But there was nothing obvious. No photos with anyone suspicious, no check-ins at odd places. If she was seeing Kyle, she was keeping it well under wraps. My mind kept going back to that night when Jenna disappeared. Where had she gone? My gut told me that's when she had met up with him, but I couldn't be sure. I needed to figure out where they'd been together. That's when it hit me, the GPS in her car. It tracks locations, saving the most recent destinations. If she'd been somewhere unusual, it would show up. I couldn't believe I hadn't thought of it sooner. I slipped into the garage and opened her car door, heart pounding as I powered on the GPS. I navigated through the settings, pulling up the last few places she'd driven to. At first, it was all normal. Work, the grocery store, a friend's house. But then, something odd popped up. A location on the outskirts of town. A hotel. The timestamp was from 2 nights ago. A hotel. Felt like someone had punched me in the gut. My suspicions were no longer just suspicions. She had gone to a hotel that night, the night she vanished during our silent treatment. My mind raced with possibilities, but there was only one scenario that made sense. She had met him there. The question was, what now? I could have confronted her with what I knew right then, but something held me back. I wanted to understand the full extent of her betrayal before I made a move. I needed to know just how deep this went. I made a call to a friend of mine, Luke. He wasn't just any friend. He worked as a private investigator. We weren't close, but we'd known each other for years, and I trusted him to be discreet. I explained the situation without going into too much detail, just enough to get him on board. "Can you follow her?" I asked. He hesitated for a moment before agreeing. "I'll do it," he said. "But are you sure you want to know?" I paused, staring at Jenna's car as the weight of his words sunk in. Did I really want to go down this road? What if I found out something I couldn't handle? "I need to know," I said quietly. With Luke on board, I spent the rest of the day in a haze, waiting. He would follow her the next time she went out, hopefully catching her in the act. In the meantime, I had to pretend everything was normal. That meant talking to Jenna as if I wasn't about to uncover her darkest secrets. That night, she came home late again, offering the same excuse, work. I nodded, pretending to believe her, all while wondering if she had been with Kyle. She was distant again, barely speaking, retreating to the bedroom after a quick dinner. As I lay in bed, listening to the sound of her soft breathing, I felt like I was living in a nightmare. How could this be happening? How could someone I'd built a life with, shared so many memories with, betray me like this? Every memory felt tainted. Every moment we'd shared now seemed like a lie. Days passed, and Jenna continued her routine, seemingly unaware that I was growing more suspicious by the hour. Luke kept me updated, tailing her whenever she left the house. Most of the time, she stuck to her usual patterns, work, errands, visiting friends. But there were a few nights where she made unexplained detours. Late meetings that didn't add up. Phone calls that ended abruptly when I entered the room. The anxiety was eating me alive, but I kept my cool. I had to. The time wasn't right yet. Then one afternoon, Luke called. His voice was tense. "I followed her to the hotel again," he said. "Same place as before." My heart sank. It was happening again. "Is she with him?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Yeah, they just walked in together." That was it. There was no more room for doubt, no more second-guessing. Jenna was cheating on me, and she was doing it right under my nose. But now I had the evidence. I just needed to decide what to do with it. The revelation of Jenna's betrayal hit me harder than I could have imagined. Even though I'd suspected it, hearing Luke's confirmation that she was at the hotel with Kyle turned my world upside down. She had lied to me, hidden things, betrayed everything we'd built together. And now I had the proof. As I sat in my car, gripping the phone tightly in my hand, I had to fight back the urge to storm down to that hotel and tear her world apart. Right then and there. But I knew that confronting her without a plan would only lead to chaos. I had to be smarter than that. The idea of catching her in the act was satisfying, sure, but it would give her the chance to weasel her way out, to twist the narrative. I needed a strategy. I called Luke back. "Don't do anything yet," I told him. "Just keep watching her. I want to know everything." "Are you sure? You've already got enough to confront her," Luke said, sounding a bit surprised. "I know," I replied, staring out the windshield at nothing in particular. "But I'm not ready to blow this open yet. I need to think." The truth was, I needed time to figure out what came next. It wasn't just about catching Jenna in the act. It was about what happened after. Divorce? Public humiliation? Could I even forgive her if she somehow begged for forgiveness? The questions circled in my head like vultures. When Jenna came home that night, she acted as if nothing was wrong. There wasn't a trace of guilt or remorse on her face. Just the same practiced calmness. It almost made me sick. But I played along, pretending everything was normal while internally plotting my next move. Over the next few days, Luke continued to feed me updates. He followed her to the hotel twice more, confirming what I already knew. Each time it was Kyle. Each time I got closer to my breaking point. Then, one evening, Luke called with a new piece of information. "I did some digging on this Kyle guy," Luke said, his voice low and serious. "He's not just some random guy Jenna met. He's her coworker." That hit me like a ton of bricks. A coworker? She'd been working with him this whole time? It explained so much. Her late nights, the constant work meetings, and why she always seemed to be texting someone during her supposed office hours. But there was more. "Kyle's married too," Luke continued. I thought you'd want to know. That changed everything. Jenna wasn't just cheating on me. She was involved with someone who had his own family, his own wife. It added a whole new layer to the betrayal. And suddenly, I wasn't just thinking about confronting Jenna. I was thinking about how to blow up their entire little affair. His wife deserved to know, too. This wasn't just my battle anymore. I had to meet her, Kyle's wife. But how? I couldn't just show up out of nowhere. I needed to find a way to approach her carefully. That night, I sat down at the computer and did a bit of digging of my own. Luke had already given me Kyle's full name, and it didn't take long to find him on social media. He wasn't very private, which worked in my favor. I scrolled through his profile, finding photos of him with a woman, his wife, apparently. They had kids, too. A perfect little family, living a double life just like Jenna and Kyle were. I felt a strange mix of anger and guilt. How long had this been going on? How many lives were going to be destroyed because of their selfishness? Finally, I found what I was looking for. His wife's name was Emily. I clicked on her profile, scanning through her posts. It was strange, looking into the life of a woman who had no idea her world was about to be shattered. She seemed happy, unsuspecting, completely unaware of what her husband had been doing behind her back. I considered messaging her right then and there, but something held me back. Was it really my place to drag her into this mess? Would it be better for her to hear it from me or to find out another way? I stared at the screen, debating my next move. But one thing was certain, I couldn't keep this to myself much longer. Jenna and Kyle had been lying to both of us, and the truth was about to come crashing down. The next morning, I made my decision. I couldn't stand by and let them get away with it anymore. I drafted a message to Emily. Simple, direct, but vague enough to make her curious. Hi Emily, I'm sorry to contact you like this, but I think there's something you should know about your husband. Could we talk? I hovered over the send button, my finger trembling. Once I hit send, there would be no going back. Everything would change. I took a deep breath and clicked send. Now all I could do was wait. After I sent the message to Emily, time seemed to slow down. I kept checking my phone every few minutes, waiting for her response, but hours passed without a word. It was nerve-wracking, like standing on the edge of a cliff, waiting for a push that never came. Meanwhile, Jenna carried on as usual, unaware of the storm brewing around her. She left for work, texting on her phone the whole time, while I sat in silence, replaying every conversation, every interaction we'd had over the past few weeks. It was maddening, trying to piece together how long she had been deceiving me. Late that afternoon, just when I thought Emily would never respond, my phone buzzed. Who is this? What are you talking about? I took a deep breath. This was it. I typed back slowly, choosing my words carefully. My name is Ryan. I think your husband, Kyle, has been seeing my wife, Jenna. I didn't want to believe it at first, but I've got proof. I'm sorry to have to tell you this. I stared at the screen, heart pounding, and hit send. The response was almost immediate. That's insane. You're mistaken. Her initial denial didn't surprise me. Who would want to believe something like that? But I had come prepared. I know it's hard to believe, but I can show you the messages between them. I've been tracking their movements. They've met up at a hotel several times. I'm not making this up, Emily. There was a long pause. I could almost feel her trying to process the bomb I had just dropped. Then, finally, she responded. Send me the proof. I felt a strange mixture of relief and dread. I didn't want to destroy another person's life, but Emily deserved to know the truth. I forwarded her the screenshots of the messages between Jenna and Kyle, the flirtatious texts, the late-night plans, and the damning message from 2 nights ago about their amazing night together. It was all there. Took a while before she responded again. When she did, it was just one word. Thank you. I could almost hear the pain behind those words, the weight of her world collapsing. I wanted to say something comforting, but what could I say? There was nothing that would make this easier for either of us. We were both victims in a twisted game that neither of us asked to play. The rest of the day passed in a blur. I couldn't focus on anything else, waiting to see what Emily would do with the information I'd given her. I felt like I had set something in motion, and now all I could do was wait for the fallout. That night, Jenna came home later than usual. She seemed off, tense, distracted. Her usual calm, composed demeanor had cracked ever so slightly. I wondered if she had sensed something, or if Emily had already confronted Kyle. Whatever it was, Jenna wasn't acting like her usual self. "Long day?" I asked, keeping my tone casual. She barely looked at me, her eyes darting around like she was trying to avoid the conversation. "Yeah, busy," she muttered, heading straight to the bedroom without any further explanation. I watched her retreat, feeling a strange sense of satisfaction. Her walls were starting to crumble, just like mine had when I first found out. She was no longer in control. Later that night, while Jenna slept, I got another message from Emily. I confronted him. He admitted everything. My heart raced as I read her message. It was happening. The lie was unraveling, and there was no turning back. "What did he say?" I asked. Emily's response was blunt. He tried to justify it, said it was just a fling, that it didn't mean anything. I kicked him out. I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. Kyle's world was collapsing, just as Jenna's would soon. But the anger in Emily's message struck a chord with me. It wasn't just sadness or betrayal. It was fury. A woman wronged, determined to take back control of her life. "What are you going to do now?" I asked, genuinely curious about her next move. Emily's reply was swift and full of resolve. "I don't know yet, but I'm not going to let him off easy. They're both going to pay for this." I felt a strange sense of camaraderie with her. We were in this together now, two people whose lives had been torn apart by the same betrayal. And just like Emily, I was done playing the victim. I had spent too long watching, waiting, and hurting. It was time to act. But before I could decide on my next move, something happened that I hadn't expected. The next morning, Jenna's phone rang. She was in the shower, so I picked it up off the nightstand, planning to take it to her. But the name on the screen stopped me cold. It was Kyle. Without thinking, I answered. There was silence on the other end for a moment, then a hesitant voice. "Jenna?" "No," I said, my voice calm but laced with venom. "It's her husband. You want to explain why you're calling my wife?" There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end. Then Kyle hung up. I stood there, gripping the phone, my pulse racing. He knew. He knew I was on to him. Jenna came out of the bathroom a moment later, oblivious to what had just happened. I watched her closely, wondering if she had any idea what was coming. The game was up. Now it was just a matter of how I would play my final hand. The tension in the house had become unbearable. Jenna could feel it. Something was off. She started acting more cautious, keeping her phone close, avoiding eye contact with me. It was like she knew her secret was hanging by a thread, but she didn't know when or how it would all come crashing down. After Kyle's call, I was no longer interested in subtlety. I wanted her to squirm. I wanted her to know that I wasn't some clueless husband who could be easily deceived. But most of all, I wanted her to know that the end was coming, and it wouldn't be pretty. The next morning, as Jenna left for work, I decided it was time to set the final stage. I called Luke to go over the plan. I knew that just confronting her with words wouldn't be enough. I needed her to feel the weight of her betrayal in front of everyone who mattered to her. "I'm going to confront them both," I told Luke, "but not before I make sure she has nowhere to run." Luke, always pragmatic, offered his help again. "I can get the camera ready. We'll catch everything in real time. If it goes viral, even better." I smirked. That wasn't a bad idea at all. There was a certain poetic justice to the idea of broadcasting her lies for the world to see. But before we got ahead of ourselves, I had one final card to play. That afternoon, I sent Jenna a message. "We need to talk tonight. I'm making dinner. Don't be late." I could tell she was suspicious, but she couldn't exactly refuse. It wasn't unusual for us to sit down and talk things out when we had rough patches, so I knew she wouldn't be able to see what was really coming. But I had something else planned before the big confrontation. I messaged Emily. "It's time to finish this. Can you meet me at the hotel tonight?" Her response was almost immediate. "I'll be there." I didn't tell her the full plan, but she trusted me enough to know I wouldn't let this slide. Together, we were going to take down both Jenna and Kyle in one devastating blow. As I drove to the hotel that evening, my heart raced with a strange combination of dread and satisfaction. It was almost like I was watching everything unfold from the outside. Like I wasn't really living it, but just a character in some twisted drama. Maybe I had been too calm, too calculated. But at this point, I didn't care. I had to see it through. When I arrived at the hotel, Luke was already there. We met in the lobby, and he handed me the small camera he'd set up. It was discreet, but powerful enough to capture every word, every movement. "Ready?" Luke asked, his expression serious. "As ready as I'll ever be," I replied, trying to suppress the pounding in my chest. We headed up to the floor where Jenna and Kyle had been meeting for their trysts. Emily was already waiting by the door of the room, her face pale but determined. She nodded at me, and I could tell she was barely holding it together. "Let's get this over with," she said, her voice tight with emotion. Luke positioned the camera, and I knocked on the door. There was a moment of silence. Then the door creaked open slightly. Jenna's shocked face appeared first, her eyes wide with horror as she saw me standing there. Kyle stood behind her, looking like a deer caught in headlights. "Ryan," Jenna stammered, her voice shaky. "What are you doing here?" I stepped inside, not waiting for an invitation. Emily followed, glaring at Kyle with a fury I'd never seen before. "What's going on here?" Kyle asked, trying to act innocent, but the panic in his voice betrayed him. I let out a bitter laugh. "Don't play dumb, Kyle. You know exactly what this is." "Jenna," Kyle, "meet your reckoning." Jenna's face went pale. "Ryan, I can explain." "No." I cut her off sharply. "You don't get to explain. I already know everything. The texts, the hotel meetings, all of it." Kyle, clearly panicking now, tried to step forward, but Emily blocked him. "You disgust me," she spat. "How could you? Our family, our kids. You threw it all away for this." Jenna's lip quivered as she realized there was no escaping the truth. "It was a mistake," she whispered, tears welling up in her eyes. "I didn't mean for it to go this far." I stared at her, cold and unfeeling. "You've been making this mistake for weeks. Don't insult me with your lies." The room was thick with tension, every second feeling like an eternity. Emily and I stood together, united in our pain, while Jenna and Kyle squirmed under the weight of their betrayal. But I wasn't done yet. "I've recorded everything," I said, pulling out my phone. "And I'm not just talking about this confrontation. I've got all the proof, texts, photos, videos. Everything." Jenna's eyes widened with terror. "Ryan, please," she begged. "Don't do this. We can work this out. I'll do anything. Just don't." "It's too late for that," I interrupted, my voice hard as steel. "You should have thought about that before you decided to cheat." I turned to Kyle, who was still standing in stunned silence. "And as for you, I hope your wife makes sure you never see your kids again." Emily nodded, her expression cold and resolute. "He won't," she said. "I'm done with him." Jenna broke down then, sobbing uncontrollably. But there was no sympathy left in me. The woman I thought I knew had been gone for a long time, replaced by someone who could lie, cheat, and manipulate without a second thought. "I'll be filing for divorce," I said calmly. "And trust me, I'll make sure you get nothing." Jenna collapsed into a chair, her sobs echoing through the room. Kyle tried to comfort her, but Emily yanked him away, leading him out of the room with a disgusted look on her face. The game was over. As I walked out of that hotel room, I felt a strange sense of relief. It was done. Jenna had been exposed, and there was no turning back now. I didn't know what the future held for me, but at least I knew one thing. I was free.